Inside of today's video, I'm going to be teaching you guys the fundamentals of how to draft. This will be part of a series where basically this entire week I'm going to teach you guys completely how to draft, and this one's going to teach you about the matchups, just about how to draft in particular game modes, etc. So let's just dive into it. First thing you need to consider when you're playing ranked is the ban phase, and it's all to do with the coin toss. So whoever wins the coin toss will get first pick, and then of course if the opponents have first pick, that means you have sixth pick. So the reason why this is really important is because in some maps, having last pick, so the last choice of all the brawlers, is actually the best because you get to take a look at the opponent's composition and you can counter it, but more on that later on in the video. So if you have first pick, you want to, well, if the opponent has first pick, you want to ban the best brawlers. So I do a cheat sheet for this every single season. So I know it doesn't teach you the ins and outs, but if you just take a look at the cheat sheet for every single map, you'll know who's the best. There's some brawlers that you must absolutely ban, just like Juju, for example. In previous metas, there was always someone that you needed to ban, like Mo, Kenji, etc. So it's always worthwhile knowing who's the best brawlers in the game just for that reason. But then, if you're first pick yourself, you even need to consider banning good late pick brawlers. So those are going to be brawlers like throwers, assassins. Again, it can vary on the map and whatever else, but in general it normally is like an assassin or something. Or you can take a different route. You could just ban a good brawler in general. So for example, if I'm playing like double swoosh, I just get really annoyed by Janet because Janet is so good into other lanes, so I just ban her out so I don't have to worry about her. So there's a few approaches you can take if, like, who depends on who's first pick. So if you're second or third pick, there's a few things you need to know. So most of the time, of course, the opponent's going to be first pick, but you want to look to try and counter that brawler. A lot of the time it's actually pretty difficult because of course they have first choice. With 88 brawlers in the game, they're going to pick a really strong brawler, so you can try and counter them, or you can pick two brawlers that are just good against everything. So there's a lot of like really dynamic brawlers and brawlers that are just in general just hard to counter, and you'll learn later on in the video. Or you can try and leave brawlers that would be good as last pick. So in general, you don't really want to pick like assassins that early on in the draft because they're easy to counter, and it might stop your teammate from picking an assassin and countering the opponent. So just bear that in mind. Don't pick a lot of good late pick brawlers. So if you're fourth or fifth pick, in general this is pretty good, but all you got to take into consideration a few things. So the first thing you got to consider is that the opponent has last pick, so one of these two brawlers has to be good against a potential last pick threat. So for example, if your two teammates have already picked, I don't know, Gus and Janet, something like that, those are two low DPS brawlers, so that means you just have to pick an anti-tank or maybe something that's good against throwers, for example. So it's pretty hard to always find the perfect brawler, but the most common theme is like an assassin or a tank late pick. So making sure that you've got everything covered with your draft, and again making sure that you're not being countered too easily by that thrower or assassin late pick. And then if you're sixth pick, in my opinion, this will always be the best pick in draft because you literally get to see your two teammates picks, you get to see the three opponents picks, and with so many brawlers in the game, there's normally a brawler that can at least counter two of the three brawlers available. Again, this will depend on your knowledge of the meta and just of the game in general, but again, a lot of the time it's going to be like throwers, it's going to be tanks, and it's going to be assassins. These three archetypes are just so good at countering the opposition. Controllers can also be pretty good last as well. There's a lot of choices, but you'll tend to learn what's good late pick the more you play ranked. Just another quick general tip about drafting. Again, you've kind of just got to react to how your teammates are going. So for example, if your teammate picks an assassin early on, which normally isn't good, you're going to expect the opponents to go some type of anti-tank. So you can do one of two things. You can support that assassin play with a healer or something like that, or you can go down a route of trying to predict and counter the anti-tank. So for example, if they go like Colette or Griff, I don't know, something like that, then you can just go like Penny or a different controller to try and counter out them harder than they're countering your assassin. Now let's move into brawler classes. So the classes that are in game, they are decent, but they're not actually that good. I'd rather just create my own classes, or just in general, this is just how I've always looked at brawlers in the meta. So first off, of course, we have the snipers. So snipers typically will have the longest ranges in the game, and typically they will shoot just one projectile. So these snipers can be countered by quite a few things. So again, we'll go on it later on. You know, like throwers can counter them, brawlers that have a gadget that can just tank their shots. So for example, I don't know, like Charlie spiders. There's just a few things that can counter them, but again, in general, they have the longest ranges in the game and they thrive on open maps. So with throwers, of course, it's pretty simple. They literally throw over a wall, and these brawlers are very toxic in the draft phase because there's some maps with unbreakable walls. And throwers, you remember Prime Larry and Laurie, yeah, they're pretty hard to counter if they've got the right matchup of literally they can shoot over walls whilst other brawlers can't. So a lot of these throws are going to be better in knockout and bounty, and some of these throws are going to be really good in like Brawl Ball, hot zone, etc. So look out for these are dangerous in the draft. Anti-tank, again, it is pretty simple. These brawlers are going to be countering your tanks and assassin brawlers, so whether that's with a gadget, whether that's with a super or anything like that, these are typically going to be played more so on the grassier maps in the game, but there's a few brawlers that have better range, for example like Colette, Maisie, etc. Again, most of them are limited to bushier maps. So next we have tanks. Of course, these brawlers are tanks because they have the biggest health pool in the game. A lot of these tanks are going to be just really good at running it down on certain maps. They're going to be good because they can't be removed from a situation without using a lot of resources. A lot of these again are going to be better on those bushier maps, closed maps. That's where they're going to thrive, and a lot of these have really game-changing hypercharges as well, so bear that in mind. They can be toxic in the draft. Next up we have the assassins. So the assassins are a little bit more flexible than the tanks. Some of these still have a lot of HP, but typically they will look to launch onto a player and quickly, you know, win a 1 versus 1 and then get out again. So the likes of like Daryl can be like a hybrid, Carl can be a hybrid. There's a few like hybrid options here, but for the most part they're just so good at 1 versus 1s and so toxic against those squishier brawlers. That's why they're assassins. Moving on to the controllers. So the controllers would typically control an area, hence their name. But whether that's through like a turret, for example, you know, a Jesse turret, you know, sitting there, you know for a fact the opponent has to respond to that, even if it's not shooting anyone. So they're just able to at least, you know, cover a certain area of the map. You know, bow mines, for example, Mr. P turrets just squeak with his normal shot. Janet's just good at just keeping zoning the opponent's back. You know, Jean constantly chipping the opponents. There's just small things like that. The next class is support. So of course support is going to be typically your kind of healer brawlers, or they're going to allow certain brawlers to thrive a lot more. So I've actually put Barry in the support category. Of course he's a thrower healer, but he's not your typical thrower. You typically use your attacks on your teammates and not to kill the opponent. So that's why I put him in a support category. Of course he's often used with his super a lot. That's where you get the most value. You know, Max is a support brawler. I know he can be a standalone brawler as well, but it's all about the super with Max and giving your teammates that kind of level with the speed. You know, Gray again with the teleport. Normally he's played with a tank, for example. You know, Kit of course can be an assassin, but primarily use Kit to jump on top of a tank and then to go in. In the final class, I've gone for DPS. So this is kind of like an anti-tank, but at the same time, primarily it's just if you just really need that damage to just take down some tanks or just to ruin the high save, for example. So you've got a couple of those. You've got like 8-bit, you've got Colt that just pure damage. You've got the likes of Ruka that can kind of do everything, a bit of an anti-tank, a bit of something else. Got Lola as well. You know, Pearl again, a lot of damage. Spike, a lot of damage. All of these brawlers just have high damage and high burst potential. Now moving it into this kind of terminology that we like to use and I've used in a previous video and I've used in competitive for literally years, is the rock, paper, scissors kind of way of countering the metas. So you see by this quick diagram, you've got snipers, throwers and support. They're going to be countering your anti-tank DPS brawlers, and of course anti-tank DPS, they're going to be countering your tanks and assassins, and then your tanks and assassins are going to be countering your snipers, throwers and support brawlers for the most part. Of course there's ways of winning interactions with super hypercharges, gadgets, etc., but it's just your general consensus of the meta and how the game works from my perspective anyways. So you've always got to understand this, and this could just be a good way of creating like a really good composition. So now let's take a look at the classes and how they're actually countered for the most part. So first off, we have anti-tanks. So anti-tanks, just think of straight away like Colette, we think of like Lou, etc. So they're going to be countered for the most part by controllers. Those are the brawlers I look to a lot of the time to counter these anti-tanks. So the likes of like Penny, those other types of brawlers. And then throwers, although they're not like the biggest counter out there, throwers will be pretty annoying for them in general. Most of the time these anti-tanks won't have like wall breaks all the time, etc. So throwers can be pretty decent against them. Snipers are in general pretty good against anti-tanks. You know, for example, if the map is pretty open or if the map gets opened up to try and counter those tanks, or snipers can then destroy the anti-tanks because of course they'll outrange them. That's just typical Brawl Stars knowledge. A brawler outranges you, typically they're going to have the better matchup. And then finally, open maps. So open maps will counter anti-tanks because most of the time they kind of have like medium range, so typically look for those snipers on open maps. So with assassins, it's pretty simple. In terms of assassins are really good in 1 versus 1 matchups, but a lot of the time, you know, like pinches can be really useful. So the first part, of course, is going to be anti-tank. Anti-tank are pretty much anti-assassins as well, whether that's a gadget, super that can defeat them. You've also just got pretty much a DPS because some of these assassins have a lot of HP, like Buzz, Daryl, Carl, etc. So some quick burst damage will be able to just dispose of them pretty quickly, or like Edgar, for example. You've also got tanks. Tanks are really good into assassins because assassins, they like the squishier brawlers. They can't really beat tanks in that 1 versus 1. Again, just think of Mortis. Mortis is just terrible into like Bull, terrible into like Jackie, etc. So tanks are really good. And then again, open maps. The reason being is because assassins are super limited in their range, and they like to play on bushier maps. So open maps, open up the map with wall breaker, or just open maps in general, are the biggest counters to them. Some counters to control brawlers. The first one is going to be tanks. So the only thing is with tanks, of course, they will win the 1 versus 1. Most of the time, controllers don't have the DPS to keep up. So for example, like Janet, like Penny, they're countered by tanks because they've just got such low damage. But the kind of weird thing about it is that they're going to feed a lot of supers tanks also. You've got to bear that in mind. You're going to feed a lot of penny turrets, a lot of hypercharges. Then you've also got assassins as well. So assassins should just destroy controllers in 1 versus 1s. You think of like Edgar jumping onto most of these brawlers. It just rips through them every single time. Or like a stun with Buzz, for example. Next you got throwers. So again, a lot of times these controllers haven't got a way to kind of close the gap onto throwers. They haven't got like a quick jump gadget, or just, I don't know, like a dash, or the HP required to get down throwers. So again, you know, throwers will destroy like penny turrets, any other turrets of any kind. Then you've also got wall breakers. So again, wall breakers are really good into control brawlers because a lot of the time they are limited in range, and it can expose their kind of turrets or anything like that. So it can be pretty good. And the last one is going to be like a synergy. So it's going to be support brawlers plus health. So a lot of times, again, if I'm facing off against like a Penny or a Janet or something like that, they have low damage. So I'm going to go and pair up a Frank with a Barry or a Byron or a Poco or something like that, and it's nothing they can do because no matter how much ammo they haven't got the damage to take us down. So I love that synergy against controllers. Now moving on to snipers. So snipers typically will get countered by tanks. Most of the time it's because snipers, they'll have some big damage, but often they have a super slow reload speed. So tanks on like those kind of medium short range maps will be able to destroy them, but of course you don't typically see tanks on those open maps, so bear that in mind. Assassins, again, some snipers do have that kind of knockback. Well, most snipers actually do have that, or a slow or something, but in a 1 versus 1, assassins will win that. It's just a majority of the time, you know, knockout and bounty, it's pretty hard to get a kill on a sniper, but actually and survive afterwards. So that's why assassins are good into them, but pretty rare. It's more like a hybrid assassin. Then you've got throwers. Of course, snipers are really typically squishy. There's the odd exception with like RT, Gus with a shield, etc. But throwers in general should be able to handle snipers pretty well, especially with longer range throwers like Tick, for example. You've also just got bushy maps. So of course, bushy maps are a big counter to snipers because those tanks and other brawlers can sneak up close to them and close the gap. And snipers, of course, their biggest asset is being able to outrange everybody. So that's just completely nullified with bushy maps. And then finally, support brawlers plus HP again. So this synergy is just really good right now in like hot zone and just other situations. But the reason being, again, because snipers just have low ammo. Well, not low ammo, slow reloads. So they just can't kill them. Next up, we have the support brawlers. So of course, support brawlers are really used to support your team, and for the heals, or just for some kind of super synergy, etc. So for the most part, tanks will destroy support brawlers, because you think of support brawlers, you think of Barry, you think of, you know, Barry's okay, but like Poco, Pam, they don't have a lot of damage, right? They're used to kind of sustain your position on the map. So tanks can a lot of time just run through them, just literally laugh at the damage they're able to output. Assassins, again, really good. You think of like Edgar again into most of these brawlers, like Poco, Byron, and just all of these other support brawlers, gonna be good. DPS. So the reason why DPS is so good and not anti-tank is because Of course, the amount of healing that support brawlers can provide, well, the DPS brawlers, they can just rip through that healing, so that's why you want to go there most of the time. And wall breaks. So wall breaks are really good against support brawlers because you want to open up the map and stop them from like grouping up. For example, the more space there is, the more open it is, there's more chance that your anti-tanks, DPS brawlers can outrange them, pinch them, and bring them down. The next class is tanks. So these are more so the easier brawler to play at the lower end. At the higher end, it's actually pretty hard to play tanks, mainly because there's so many counters for them. Weirdly enough, yeah, it just works pretty weird. But in terms of their biggest counters, of course, anti-tank, it's literally in their name, anti-tank. So this was just terminology just used throughout the years in Brawl esports. But again, you want these big damage dealers that can just destroy tanks pretty easily with gadgets, with knockbacks, with supers, blah, blah, blah. And then you have DPS brawlers again. It's literally in the name, damage, output. They want to just be able to shred through those tanks' HP. Again, you've got these big burst brawlers, which if tanks get too close to them, they'll just be dispatched so quickly with the super, etc. Then again, got wall breakers. So the reason why wall breakers are so good into tanks is because it exposes them. Tanks have very limited range, so if you start to destroy the bushes, the walls that they can hide behind, then you can easily pinch them out a lot easier. And that, of course, leads us into open maps. So either that's an open map in general, which you just won't see tanks on. Again, shooting star, you never see tanks. But again, you can create an open map through the wall breaks, so tanks just hate that. And then finally, we have the counters to throwers. So first off, we have tanks. So again, tanks might feed throwers a lot of super, but the thing is, for the most part, if you can play it well, throwers just don't have the ammo to take down tanks fully. You know, they can get them weak, but eventually tanks can just run through them, or at least create pressure to force the throwers back. Again, we've got assassins. So assassins are so good against throwers. Think of any brawler that can jump over a wall, like Miko, Edgar, just eat throwers alive. Think of Mortis, dash through. You know, there's a lot of assassins that can just easily eat through throwers. Again, you've got wall breaks. So wall breakers, to begin with, won't get countered by throwers, but of course, once they start to open up the map with a super, with gadgets, etc., then they can just keep throwers at bay. But a lot of time, you have to destroy a lot of the map, so it's not actually that, you know, easy. Again, open maps are going to counter throwers, of course they are, because throwers like it when there's kind of a lot of walls and a lot of limited space, so they can make use of the choke points. And then, of course, bushy maps. So throwers can be okay in bushy maps, but that's when they typically face off against assassins and tanks. So even if they can play it perfectly, even if they equip the vision gear, etc., most of the time, you know, a tank's going to be able to get through and take you down. This next section is all about mainly the free-to-play players, or just how to well-round your kind of brawler pool, so you make sure that you've always got something in the draft. So of course, you're pretty much going to go down all of these classes and make sure you've got 2 or 3 of those brawlers. Of course, depending on how good they are on the meta, you kind of want to upgrade them. So whether you watch my tier list or whatever, or just a few general brawlers that are always good in the meta and just good everywhere. So first off, we have snipers. So we've got Bell, Piper, and Gus. So these 3 brawlers are just good at everything. You can play all of these on long range maps or knockout and bounty. Next, we've got throwers. So you've got Larry. So Larry's going to be good everywhere, and I mean everywhere. Every single game mode, he's going to be usable. Juju, again, going to be pretty good everywhere. A lot of times she's banned out, but she's just super versatile. That's what you want in a thrower. And then you want a knockout bounty thrower. So it's going to be Sprout or Tick. They've got really long ranges, and they're also going to be really dominant in those 2 game modes. So we have anti-tanks. So with anti-tanks, we've got Lou, Surge, Otis, and Colette. So these brawlers are going to be pretty good everywhere. You know, Lou's going to be better in like Hot Zone, Gem Grab, etc. Surge going to be good on those really bushy maps. And then you got like Otis, again good on bushy maps with the vision gear and got pretty decent range for an anti-tank. And Colette better in high spot, really good at pretty much shutting down those tanks. So with tanks, you want a little bit of everything. So you want to go maybe like a support tank, so that's like Buster. So he's kind of good into everything because of his super, and he's just good at position on the map. You've got El Primo. So again, El Primo's good at countering other tanks, so you kind of want that in your arsenal. And then you've got Frank. So Frank, of course, is tankiest tank, and a lot of times you can literally just go Frank and win if the opponent haven't got the DPS to counter him. Assassins, I like the really flexible assassins. So Daryl, I'll always like him since the rework. 2 roles is just so good in every situation. Kenji, he's just a better version of Mortis with the healing, a lot more flexible, and you're just able to get around the map a lot easier, of course, with faster reload speed. Cordelius, again, that assassin that can do everything, and the same goes with Stu as well. Support brawlers, so of course you want a healer, and then you just want your typical kind of good at everything. So first off, I went with Byron. So Byron's your sniper that can turn into a healer, pretty good against most things. Max as well, just good in general at supporting, just good at getting supers for your teammates and taking over over the map, and then probably just like another healer on top of that, like poke. DPS is a pretty easy choice as well. First off, we have Rico. So Rico is just a carry brawler right now, and everyone knows that because of his broken gadget and his hypercharge. Amber is just an ultimate flexible brawler, just good everywhere, high damage, and it's not really many counters to her. And then lastly, it's up to you whether you want Lola or Griff. Griff is good to open up the map and counter a lot of different brawlers, and Lola's just good because she's good into everything. Lastly, for control, I have Penny, Sandy, and Janet. So Penny, of course, good on those longer range maps as well, kind of, and then just with a turret can take over the game. Sandy, Brawl, Gem Grab, Hot Zone is just your guy. And then Janet as well, so good at countering so many brawlers just by extra range. Let's move on to the game mode. So of course this is very, very important because depending on the game mode, depending on the map, it depends on what brawlers you can draft. Of course, I won't go through every single map because I do that on a separate video, but just in general, here's some good tips in terms of the draft. So with Gem Grab, of course, you need one gem carrier, which is a mid brawler, which I talk about a lot of the time, which I'll put on the screen. All of your mid brawlers, typically, there's some hybrid ones as well, like Penny, for example. She can be a lane or a mid, same with Stu, same with a few other brawlers. And then, of course, you need your lane brawlers. So typically, I say in the draft, of course, you need a gem carrier, which often is going to be okay into tanks, especially if the opponent has a late pick. And then typically you want like a controller brawler, so a brawler that can like take over the game, for example, like a Sandy Super, or maybe like a Janet that's just able to control the game a lot easier down the lane. And then if the opponent has a late pick, you got to make sure that in your composition you have an anti-tank, because assassins and tanks are very, very good in gem grab. You think of double swoosh, you think of hard rock mine. There's always going to be an assassin or a tank that can get in behind enemy lines and can create pressure and kill your gem carrier, so bear that in mind. There's not really a big rule about picking like what particular mid brawler, but I will say you need to pick your mid brawler earlier on in the draft. That's what I say. You don't really want to pick your mid brawler as a last pick. The reason being is because late picks, you normally want like an assassin or like a thrower, because those are able to counter the entire enemy composition a lot of the time. So just pick your mid a little bit earlier on so you can save your better later picks for those lane brawlers. Those are going to make more of an impact on the game. Typically, you also want one brawler that's trying to kill the enemy gem carrier, or at least get behind enemy lines and forcing out a pinch. So typically these are going to be your assassins and your tanks, but it can also just be a bit of a higher HP brawler, like Nita, for example. She can still create pressure on the gem carrier with her bear, for example. There's a few other instances as well. There's also just like Tara, for example. If she can get in the bush with her super, she's a big threat. So just that kind of threat brawler in behind is really good to have in the draft. And then you also want a defender, so that's going to be like a DPS brawler, that's going to be like an anti-tank, because in general there's normally like a brawler that's trying to get behind your line and that's trying to kill your gem carrier, so you want something big and damage that can defend your gem carrier. Now moving on to Heist. Heist is a funny one because it will depend on the map and the situation, but for the most part, damage will just win you the game, plain and simple. People make this mistake a lot of the time in the draft. Well, they'll have this good composition that looks good on paper. Yeah, you might be able to counter the brawlers in the 1 versus 1, but if multiple of you go down in one instance, or maybe even a full team wipe, and that damage composition gets on the safe, they can just wipe down all 2 minutes of your control with one quick push. So that's why I just always like going multiple damage brawlers. The damage brawlers I'm talking about, like Colette with super, Cole, 8-bit, Lola, Griff, Amber, etc. There's a lot of these DPS brawlers that are just literally there to shoot the safe, and of course that's literally the aim of the game in Heist. So you can see by the screen, these are your better Heist brawlers. Of course it depends on the map. Typically you want a bit of a longer range brawlers, and then towards the end of draft you might want to go like Daryl, Tank, etc. But tanks are only really good on like Hot Potato and a few other maps that you might play. But again, if there's a lot of walls, you can go tanks, and most other maps like Bridge to Far, Safe Zone, etc. go snipers or longer range brawlers most of the time. So rule number 1 is to minimum have a brawler that's there for safe damage only. Again, these brawlers might lose their 1 versus 1 lane a lot of the time, but it's kind of up to your other brawlers to get that DPS brawler onto the safe. So for example, I might want to go like Colt or something, which again isn't actually that good against most brawlers in a 1 versus 1, but then you have like an Angela or a Piper that will help pinch a brawler and get your Colt onto a safe. So just bear that in mind, at least one brawler that deals damage to this high safe, so whether that's Brock, Daryl, etc. And then typically you want a sniper that is used to counter the enemy's DPS brawlers. So again, if the opponent picks, I don't know, like an Amber or like a Griff or again like an 8-bit or something, snipers will typically counter those brawlers. So you want a bit of everything, but making sure you got that 1 damage brawler. So now moving on to bounty. So the bounty map pool is quite limited. A lot of it comes down to like throwers, or it just comes down to snipers. Again, it is literally just long range maps most of the time. So a lot of times it's snipers and sniper counters here. So longest range typically wins. So that's why you see what likes to like Piper, Mandy being really good, Belle, Artie. There's a lot going on. You know, Nanny, of course, is good to counter the other snipers. So then you've then just got these typical bounty brawlers that are just good against most things, like Jean, for example, Pearl. You've got a lot to consider. So assassins and throwers are very good, particularly at the end of the draft. And that's why you typically see these types of hybrid brawlers that are good at, you know, they're pretty good into snipers, but are primarily there in case the opponent picks something late in the draft, which is like an assassin or a tank or something like that. So for example, that's why you see a lot of RT, because RT, he can rack up the damage with his mark, but he's also got his super to defend himself against assassins. That's why people go Pearl, because once Pearl's heated up, she can kill snipers with a gadget with a high DPS, but then of course she can just rip through tanks and assassins and defend herself with a super. That's why, you know, there's a few other brawlers that really fit that category as well, like Lola, for example. So bear that in mind with bounty, have everything in consideration. In some maps, there's a lot of rock, paper, scissors going on, like Canal Grande, for example. So it gets really messy there, but for most part, it's just about snipers and sniper counters. So now we have Brawl. So Brawl is actually probably the hardest game mode to draft in, weirdly enough. It's easy in the fact that, like, you can go pretty much any brawler. Any brawler works in Brawl and in so many different maps. That's why I love Brawl. But at the same time, it's like you've got to consider the whole brawler pool here. All 88 brawlers. It can get pretty messy, but this is where, like, being inventive in draft, and if you know the meta better than the opponents, then you can just literally win the game through draft. So typically half the maps are very rock, paper, scissors, like I said. There's a lot, you know, tanks are good, anti-tanks are good, throwers are good, snipers can be good if the map's opened up, support brawlers can be good paired with tanks. You know, there's so much to consider. Literally, you can win the draft so easily. So you can draft early a thrower that's good into everything. You know, there's some maps like Pinball Dreams. There's always going to be a map in a rotation that has really, like, defined lanes. So throwers can dominate, you know, field goal in the past, penalty kick, for example. So typically, early on in the draft, people like to go throwers that are good into everything. So Larry, Willow, Barley. There's a few brawlers like that. Juju, which can defend himself against tanks and are just really toxic down the lane, so those are drafted early. You can try and get a good dominant thrower late pick as well. So if you have last pick and you're on, like, again, field goal, well, it's not rotation right now, Pinball Dreams, etc., then you can go a late pick thrower like Dynamite, Barley, Sprout, etc. Last pick is also very good for tanks and assassins, as always, but particularly in Brawl, because a lot of these maps have grass, a lot of these maps have walls, so those assassins and tanks can just abuse this fact and just run all over people. And then, of course, on bushy maps, you've got to have at least a couple of anti-tanks or something aggressive yourself. So again, you're more than likely going to face off against a tank. If you're dumb enough to go, I don't know, like Dynamite on sneaky fields, and then like a Gus, you're obviously just going to get completely ran through by a couple of tanks or a couple of big HP brawlers like Nita, for example. So you've got to bear that in mind in your draft. And then also, most maps, you will have a mid-range brawler with decent range. So again, you have these kind of mid-range brawlers, I don't know, like Lou, Otis, or something like that. They're just kind of good into everything, you know, Amber, Griff, so you're not going to get exposed in the draft. So now I have Knockouts. Knockout is very similar to Bounty, of course, with the longer range brawlers and the throwers. But the thing about Knockout as well is that survivability is pretty key, because as the gas closes in, there's a certain few brawlers that are just really good once, again, the gas closes in. You're in that high intense situation, and they just have more HP than some certain brawlers. Of course, once the map closes down, Piper's not going to be as good, etc. So you want to make sure that you're probably having one thrower. Pretty much on all of these maps, a thrower is essential. So that's going to be like your Ticks, your Sprout, your Larrys, you know, Barley can be good later on, those types of brawlers. And then, again, you want to make sure that you got that sniper, so that whether that be like a Gus, whether it be RT, which is pretty good against most things, whether that be Piper, there's a lot of options there. And then you want a brawler that's pretty good at the end game. So genuinely, it's going to be like high HP brawlers, so like RT, for example. Again, he's like a sniper that's pretty good. He's then got a lot of HP for the late game, and then he's got a super that can defend himself against those assassins and whatever else, so he's just perfect there. Jean, again, a lot of HP, Pearl, a lot of HP. So if enemy has last pick, you gotta make sure that you've got like a brawler that can counter assassins. So again, that's why I really like Pearl. That's why I really like RT. That's why I like Jean, for example. So all of these brawlers can be good against assassins. Also, you want to make sure that you're never going free of the same brawler. So a lot of people, they tend to go like 2 snipers and a thrower, like a thrower that's bad against assassins. So for example, someone will go like Piper and then like a Mandy, and then they will go Tick, or they'll go Sprout. Well, obviously, the opponent can just go an assassin, or they could just go a tank like Buster or something and just destroy everyone, Miko. So yeah, just don't do that. That's a common mistake people make. Lastly, for game modes, we have Hot Zone. So Hot Zone is all about control. It's all about sustaining your pressure on the zone, and a lot of it is survivability and thinking about zone time. So of course, control brawlers are going to be really good, and especially if they're paired well with HP brawlers. So again, you want a brawler that's good at supporting, or just overall, you know, you've got the likes of, you know, Poco, or the likes of Berry, and then if you pair that with like a Frank, Buster, or something like that, well, it's going to take a long time for the opponents to pinch you off the zone, because there's just so much healing going on. So, and also a good thing to consider is, again, you've got to have good survivability, that you can sit on the zone for a long period of time. So of course, you think of like Duel and Beetles, for example. A lot of times I see pros, or just in the past, you know, they've gone like multiple snipers. Well, you might be able to pinch out with snipers and get a lot of kills. Well, how's a sniper going to sit on the zone for a long period of time? They're super squishy, so they haven't got much sustainability on the hot zone. Whilst kind of mid-range brawlers but have a lot of HP, they're going to have more sustain on the hot zone. So for example, like a Gale. Weirdly enough, he might get pinched eventually, but by the time he's got pinched out, he's got 20% of your zone. So of course you've got to focus on that. You know, Maisie, again, she's got a decent amount of HP, can get a lot of zone time. That's why like Pam is really good at here, etc. There's a lot of brawlers like that which you would have seen on the list. Also, throws are very good in hot zone in general. They can be good as like a late pick, or they're just good in general. Like Larry, you see it all the time in hot zone. You see Barley all the time in hot zone. You see these same brawlers again that are so good. You know, Barley's good because he can flush out the opponents on the hot zone, you know, etc. There's a lot of good things. Assassins can be good late picks, and healers work really well here too. And finally, we're going to be moving on to the draft no-nos. So these are some things that I see the opponents make big mistakes on, and I just laugh because I know it's a free game, because they've gone 3 of the same type of brawler, or 2 of the same type of brawler. So a big common one is drafting 2 or 3 snipers. So for example, in like Knockout, I see a lot of people draft 3 snipers on out in the open, or Bell's Rock. Well, you can just get a free either thrower pick, because throwers just destroy snipers, or assassin. Just don't do that. Another example is by going control support brawlers, multiple of them in the same composition. So for example, if you've got like a Janet and a Penny, or maybe like a Janet and a Mr. P, a Janet and a Squeak, well, your opponent can just literally go a tank, because they have so much health, and Janet and Squeak, they don't have the reload speed or the damage to take them down. Another big mistake is by going to tanks, especially early on in the draft, because you've guessed it, the opponents can just go hard anti-tanks. Even just one of them, you know, if you've got like a Colette or a Lou, they can literally, one brawler can counter 2 really easily. The next one is drafting 2 or 3 squishy brawlers. So kind of similar to like snipers, but there's a lot of other squishy brawlers in the game. Well, I could just take a look at those squishy brawlers. I know, for example, in like Hard Rock Mine, if you go like a Surge, Piper, and a Ruffs, well, I can just go Sprout there, because Sprout will 3-tap or 4-tap most of those brawlers, and it's just free. So that's going to be it for today's video. I hope you guys learned a lot through this. Again, this is just teaching you guys the basics for everything. I'll probably go through some example drafts and some other things in the future videos, so make sure to subscribe for that. I'll see you guys next time.